popular these days to say that forgiveness is not necessary and that it's better not to forgive. That either comes from a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is, or it's just a way of thinking that is at odds with my understanding. So I'd like to go over forgiveness today and understand what it is from my perspective, why it's powerful and why it's necessary. It's important to understand what the ego is. The ego's got one purpose. And remember, the ego's nothing but a habit of thinking. It's not an entity. It's not a person. It's not Satan or something like that. It's a habit of thinking. It's a way that we misuse our minds, or we could just say a way we use our minds. The function of the ego's thought system is to make separation seem real. And it does this by using judgment. It judges what it sees. It does that so that it can see guilt in the world, because guilt is its tool. We project guilt onto the world in order to make our idea of separation seem real. And this creates the illusion of separation that we believe is unchangeable. I'm over here, you're over there. I have a separate mind. I have a separate body. I have a separate identity. I have nothing to do with you. But that also makes us perceive ourselves as disconnected from others, and thus we get a sense of isolation and a misunderstanding of who we are as souls. And what that does is it causes us to rely on the body's eyes rather than our spiritual sight. When we no longer use our spiritual sight to see the world, then all we get is an illusion of what the senses of our body report to our brain, that our brain then reinterprets based on the illusions that it's projecting. And that's how the ego creates a world of illusion for us. It's not that the world isn't there. It's just that it's not there in the way we believe that it's there, because we are coming from a point of view, a habitual thought system that's based on this misunderstanding that we're separate from everybody. We're separate from the universe. We're separate from our creator. We're separate from everybody. And that since we're separate, we're vulnerable, and we need to protect ourselves from everything that's not like ourselves. So that's a very challenging, difficult cycle to even recognize, let alone escape from. Most of us don't even realize we're doing that. I would say the bulk of us don't recognize what we're doing. Even those of us that understand it theoretically don't always recognize that's what we're doing. We just take for granted what our eyes report to us. We take for granted what our ears report to us. We take for granted. And we all go into agreement about it. We all agree that this is that, and this is that, and this is that. That's why I always say that the ego is a conspiracy. We all conspire with one another to keep ourselves stuck, in these ideas that aren't real. And therefore, we never bother to open up our spiritual sight again, because you can't have both. You can't have the world where you're seeing projections and a world where you're seeing truth at the same time. You just can't. It's just like you can't watch two movies at once on one screen. It doesn't work that way. The ego itself has an attraction to guilt. And this attraction to guilt comes from our own need to project the guilt that we perceive in ourselves outward so that we don't have to deal with it. The ego believes that since we've created this illusory world, that somehow we've offended our creator. We've somehow offended God. We've somehow offended the force of creation itself by doing this. And this is where that whole idea of original sin comes from. That whole idea of original sin is not something that God came up with. It's not something that's real. That whole idea of falling from grace came from us when we decided to stop looking at the world truthfully, and instead we are looking at the world based on guilt that we are projecting onto the screen of space. But see, we can't bear the guilt that we feel about ourselves. So instead of healing the guilt within ourselves for doing this that we didn't really do, and we have no reason to feel guilty, we just misused our minds, but that's just an error that can be fixed. But instead of dealing with that, we have this guilt that we feel is unbearable. And so we project that outward, thinking that we're getting rid of it. And when we project the guilt outward, thinking that we're getting rid of it, all we're doing is creating more illusion and more need to protect ourselves from something that isn't really there ultimately. Why forgiveness is so helpful and necessary is not because we're condoning other people's negative behavior. The reason why forgiveness is necessary and helpful is because it starts to heal the condition of illusion, because we start to recognize that nothing really happened. We just think it did. I'm going to cover all of the reasons why people get so upset with that idea in a minute, but they really did do that. They really did do this. We can't condone this. We can't condone it. We'll cover that. But let's just come from just some real basic principles first. This metaphysical understanding that your world that you experience comes from you, not from other people. You can't escape your own perceptions, right? So the way you judge the world, the way you perceive the world is based on you. And so when you are looking at somebody's bad behavior, you're judging it. You're making up a story about it that's not true. Let's take an example from my own history. When I was 15, I was raped at gunpoint. Double-barrel shotgun. This guy terrorized me for hours, just terrorized me. And of course, I have an idea of what this was. This guy was a horrible person trying to terrorize a young kid, getting his jollies off on that. Just evil, awful, disgusting man. Did something to me that I didn't deserve. I didn't deserve that. I didn't ask for that. Maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe I could have been more careful with who I was associating with, but it wasn't my fault that happened. I didn't create that. What I did do is project onto that everything else that didn't happen. I projected my own self-worth onto that. I projected my ideas of this person being evil, satanic, disgusting, horrible. I projected everything I knew on that situation, fear, terror, blame. I'll never understand the truth of it. There's no way that I can understand the truth of what really happened because I don't know what caused that person to do that. I don't know why that person decided to go after me. I don't know why I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know why he let me live. I don't understand any of that. That's all a mystery to me. But see, my mind wants to project onto that situation. So when I forgive this person, I'm not saying, oh, it's okay. You can go and rape people at gunpoint. It's all right. You didn't mean it. Poor thing. I'm not saying that. When I forgive this person, I'm saying, I don't understand it. I don't understand why this happened. And I'm no longer going to project onto this situation stuff that I don't understand. What I do know is that as a soul, you didn't do that. As a soul, it wasn't done to me. As a soul, apart from our ego minds, none of that happened. None of that happened. So until I'm willing to get to the other side of that, where I can realize that none of that happened on the soul level, I'm stuck. I'm stuck reacting to my life as if the next person's going to be a rapist, as if the next person's going to attack me, right? And if I go back farther in my mind, I can realize this person attacked me, but I was attacked when I was a little kid every day of my life for the first 7 years of being alive. I was constantly attacked. I was constantly abused, constantly beaten. So this was definitely a continuation of a trend in my life. So until I was able to forgive not only that person, but then go back and forgive the person who was my first abuser, my primary abuser, until I was able to forgive that, I was perpetuating another bout of projection. Everything I came in contact with, I was projecting, oh, they're going to abuse me. They're going to be mean to me. I have to fight this. I have to fight that. There was no way out of that illusion until I was able to say, wait a minute. As a soul, this person never abused me. And I was never abused. Only my body was abused. Only in this three-dimensional reality was I abused. Only within that context was I abused. I had to get to the point where I was able to forgive my abuser, to forgive my rapist, and all those other people that I came in contact with that were playing that role of abuser in my life for whatever reason. Again, I'm not blaming myself. I never said I deserved this or I created this reality for myself, but I did recognize that the abuse that happened caused me to project onto other situations stuff that wasn't there. A lot of people that were not abusing me, a lot of people that had nothing but the best behavior and the best intentions got projected onto, and I didn't trust them. I didn't trust them, or I expected the worst from them. And see, this is how powerful that is. A lot of those relationships that were not abusive, but because I was expecting them to be abusive, because I didn't have any healing of this old trauma, I ruined those relationships. I destroyed those relationships because I unconsciously was expecting them to turn into the abuser, to turn into the rapist, when that was never a thing. But because I was not able to see them for who they were, and I wasn't able to see past my projections onto this situation, those people couldn't take me anymore. And so those relationships didn't work out so well. It wasn't my fault. I'm not blaming myself, but it was what happened. It wasn't their fault either, right? So it was all of that abuse. Now, why did that first person in my family abuse me? They were in pain. They didn't know any better. They really didn't. They did their very best. I'm certain of it now. Now that I'm past all of that, once I forgave them, I realized that was the best they could come up with. How sad. But then they had their story of abuse, and that person had their story of abuse, and they had their story of abuse. It didn't just come out of nowhere. This illness called the ego mind didn't just come out of nowhere. It came from being taught, so that we could learn how to project onto the screen of space, onto our world, everything that's not really there. And until we are able to forgive those people, we can't see them as souls. We can't. And we can't stop projecting onto things. It's just going to be the next person and the next situation and the next person and the next situation. So the idea that to forgive somebody, that you have to condone their behavior is so sophomoric. It's so not true. And I'm surprised that we still are talking about things like this. I thought we had gone farther than we've gone. It's not condoning someone's behavior to get to a point where you can see past their behavior. Remember how Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do"? That's what that line meant. These people don't know what they're doing. They don't know any better. They are so sick, they don't know any better. That's the best they can come up with. Condemning them and using that as an excuse to further our own illness, to perpetuate our own abuse cycles in the next phase of our lives, is really sad. Because I'll tell you, yes, it was wrong for that person to rape me. Yes, it was wrong for that person to abuse me all those years. But I took that ball and ran with it from there. I took that ball and ran with it from there and kept projecting, kept creating situations based on my own misperceptions of what was coming next, because I was so used to being abused. I was so used to the problems that I didn't know any better either. So until I was able to say, whoa, let's pull this back. Let's look and see, what am I projecting? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? It's because I'm still resenting that person for all of those years of abuse. It's still because I'm protecting myself from that person. I still am thinking that person is going to come after me and abuse me again. Unconsciously, of course. Project, 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 project. How do I get out of this cycle of projection and fear and projection and fear? I have to get to a point of forgiveness. Now, forgiveness means to give. You're giving someone grace. You're giving them grace. I talk about this and people say, well, they don't deserve my grace. That was unforgivable what they did. And it could be true that they don't deserve your grace, but you deserve your grace. You deserve it, not them. I don't really even care about them. That's up to them to get to that point. But for you, you deserve it. I had to get to that point, and so I'm forgiving them because I deserve that. I deserve that peace. I deserve that freedom. I deserve that clarity of mind that what they did doesn't have any power over me anymore. And the only way I can get to that point where what they did doesn't have power over me anymore is to forgive them. And how do you forgive someone? By being willing to see that they didn't do what you think they did. Now, in objective reality, sure, they beat me up. Sure, they raped me. Sure, they threatened to shoot me and kill me. In objective reality, that happened. But in subjective reality, that's not what was happening. They were in great pain and they didn't know what to do. And this was the best that they could come up with. How sick is that? This is the best thing that they could come up with. So when I was able to look at it like this, I was able to have compassion for them. And the reason why I needed to have compassion for them is because that gave me an ability to have compassion for myself. I couldn't have one without the other. Now, maybe you can. Maybe you can have compassion and peace in your own soul without forgiving people that have done you wrong. But I know for myself that until I was able to release those toxins of resentment and grievance, all I did was recreate it in the next relationship, and the next relationship, and the next relationship, my jobs, my finances, my health, all of those things suffered because of the inability for me to let go of what happened to me. And there's not one person on the planet that could blame me for not wanting to let it go. It was horrible what I went through. There's been several other experiences of that sort of thing that I'm not even going to go into that were equally as bad. So there's no reason why anybody would give to me that I have to forgive these people. What they did was unforgivable. If I look at it as unforgivable, then what I'm telling myself is I can't get past this. And this is all I get for the rest of my life now. This is it. So as soon as I'm able to forgive these people, then I'm able to be free. And then I don't need to project guilt onto a situation anymore. And I notice when I'm doing it and I stop it. And I'm more able when I come upon a situation that I say, I don't know what it is. I don't know what this situation is. I'm not going to start that again. I'm not going to start saying, I know what this is, and project, and then have an interaction with an illusion based on the past. I'm able to stop doing that. And that gives me so much power over every situation that I come in contact with, because I'm no longer fighting with a demon that's not really there. Instead, I'm able to allow infinite intelligence to show me the situation as it really is. And that's how I open up my spiritual sight. Rather than depending on my eyes to report to me what's happening, I'm able to open up my spiritual sight and let spirit show me what's really happening. Because what's happening on a soul level sometimes is so different than what's happening on an ego level and on a body level. And there's no forgiveness police, okay? You don't have to do anything. People get very defensive when I talk about forgiveness, as if I'm saying, no, you must forgive. You don't have to do anything. I'm just sharing with you what works, at least from my experience. Forgiveness really works, and resentment really doesn't. Grievance does not work, but forgiveness does. If your goal is to open up your spiritual eye and to be guided by spirit rather than by your own resentments, which is what your ego mind is, a collection of resentments. I think it was Al-Anon that has that line, hanging on to a resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. Because those resentments, they are toxic, but they're toxic in that becomes then the reality for the next situation, even if you don't think it is. It's colored by that. And until you let go of those resentments, you don't realize how powerful those resentments were in keeping you stuck. So nobody can make you forgive anybody. And you don't need to rush forgiveness. You hang out for as long as you need to. But ultimately, there's no way out except for by disregarding it, except for not believing in it and letting it go. Now that's, again, not saying that you let people off the hook to the point where you don't protect yourself in this world. There's still restraining orders in this world. There's still prison in this world. There's still all kinds of things that need to be done. I'm just talking about what goes on in your heart. You can start to open up that spiritual eye by forgiving, and you do it for yourself. You do it out of self-interest. You don't do it for them. That's up to them to clean up their own side of the street. That's not your business. Your business is, I'm going to be freed from you completely. And the only way I can be freed from you completely is to recognize that on the other side of your behavior, on the other side of your ego, and on the other side of your body, there is a soul that is not abusive. It's not an abuser. And I know that's there, And that's the only reality for me. And I completely detach myself from you, and I'm completely free from you. You can't hurt me anymore because I forgive you. And when I forgive, I'm protected. Forgiveness is not something that you do lightly, but it's also not something that you do selectively. It's actually easier sometimes for me to take these big culprits, like the rapist, like the abuser, and forgive them because it's such a big deal. It's just so crazy how massive that was. But it's harder for me to forgive the little things, the little resentments that kind of pile up because I don't notice them as much. They don't sting as hard. They don't seem to pose as big of a problem in the moment. So I can just let those pile up. But what I've discovered through forgiving these so-called big events in my life is that I don't want any of them. I don't want any of those resentments. And so I've gotten to a point where before I go to bed at night, I look and I say, who am I resenting? I don't wonder if I'm resenting. I just look to see who it is because I know I'm resenting some people because I've collected those resentments all day long and my ego is really good at hiding that from my conscious mind. So who have I resented? If I just forgive those people, let it go, let them be, then I'm safer. I'm freer. I'm more purified. People talk about how do I cleanse my aura? Forgiveness is a great aura cleanser. Your aura shines and shimmers if you're not holding resentments. And as you let go of those resentments and your aura shines and shimmers, you are much safer. You are much more protected. When we learn how to forgive and release and let go of our attachment and our investment in our resentments and our grievances, we make our lives safer. We make our minds more peaceful. And we allow ourselves to stop recreating problems. And as we do that, we become wiser, we become filled with light, spiritual light, and then we start seeing things in a different way. And then this whole world stops being what we thought it was. And the world as we once knew it disappears. And the real world is revealed in its place. And that's something that we can all do. A Course in Miracles says that if one person on this planet ever truly and fully forgave somebody, everybody would see the real world and we wouldn't have this illusion anymore. So maybe that'll be you. Maybe that'll be me. And only practice can ever reveal whether that's true or not. The idea that forgiveness is something that is silly, the idea that forgiveness is something that is perpetuating abuse, the idea that forgiveness is condoning bad behavior is all based on a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is just acknowledging that nothing in this three-dimensional world is the way we think it is. And that since these people who are being abusive or these people that are acting out are sick, we can see beyond their sickness. We can see beyond what they've done to us, and we can ask that their soul be revealed to us, and we can wish them literally all the blessings in life. And when we can start thinking about that person with no sting, if that person were to come into our presence and we just were, hi, how are you doing? We didn't feel bad. We didn't feel unsafe. We didn't feel scared. Then we know that we've done it. And when we've done that, we've literally allowed ourselves to be safer. We've allowed ourselves to be more successful, more peaceful, more happy, healthier, easier to get along with. Because now all of our relationships aren't going to be the recipients of projections of old unhealed trauma that we were just unwilling to forgive. And I'm not saying that what you went through didn't happen or that it was trivial. No. I'm saying that I understand how challenging it is when something's happened. The answer isn't to perpetuate the abuse. The answer is not to perpetuate the trauma. The answer is to release it and to let go of it and to learn to live without it. And you can do it. I can do it. We all can do it if we really want to. And that's the bottom line. How much do you want peace? How much do you want happiness? Because you can't have peace and happiness and resentment. Impossible. It's just, you can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't have just a little bit of resentment either. But by the same token, you can't just be a little bit happy. It's really all or nothing. So as we forgive and release our resentments, and learn to live without them, it's giving up an addiction. You have to become accustomed to the new normal. And as you become accustomed to a life without resentments, you'll notice that what you project onto the screen of space becomes very different, and you start perceiving a new world. And that new world is absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I very much appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.